"I'll give you 100 million if you open the safe," the millionaire mocked. But the poor boy shut him up. What seemed like just a cruel joke in front of everyone hid a truth no one could have imagined. The boy stayed silent until he exposed flaws even the creators of the system didn't know existed. That day, it wasn't the safe that opened. It was the mask of an empire that believed itself untouchable. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. New York City breathes money. On the wide avenues of Midtown Manhattan, mirrored glass skyscrapers reflect the gray afternoon sky, as if they were portals to a world only a select few can enter. On the 42nd floor of one of these imposing towers, the boardroom of Thompson Sterling feels more like an altar to power than a workspace. The oval Italian marble table gleams under the recessed ceiling lights. German leather chairs await their occupants. On the walls, digital panels display graphs that fluctuate like the heartbeat of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Edward Thompson walks through the room with the confidence of a man who has never had to ask for permission to exist. His 53 years have been kind to his appearance. Graying hair slicked back, a bespoke navy blue suit, a Swiss watch on his left wrist worth more than most people make in a decade. His light eyes observe everything with a mix of calculation and contempt, disguised as indifference. He built this empire with strategy, ambition, and an almost supernatural ability to turn others' suffering into opportunities. Every market crisis was a stepping stone for him. Every eliminated adversary a silent victory. On that Thursday afternoon, the executives begin to arrive. Robert Fisher, Director of Corporate Security, enters first. A 48-year-old man, broad-shouldered, with a perpetually suspicious expression. He doesn't smile, just nods. His loyalty to Edward is unwavering, not out of admiration, but out of dependence. He knows that without this hierarchical structure, his own existence would be questioned. Next comes Anthony Carter, the General Counsel, an experienced lawyer with completely white hair and thin-rimmed glasses. He carries folders of documents and a perpetually worried expression. Finally, Julian Miller and Patricia Evans, the directors of finance and marketing, arrive. Both are young, ambitious, with practiced smiles and watchful eyes. The meeting begins with its usual coldness. Numbers are presented, projections are debated. Edward listens to everything with an intimidating silence. He doesn't need to say much to command the room. His presence alone is a declaration of superiority. But something interrupts the mechanical flow of the conversation. The door opens discreetly and a woman enters, pushing a cleaning cart. She wears a faded navy blue uniform, her hair in a simple bun, her eyes downcast. Her name is Maria Sanchez. Maria is 38, but she looks older. Life has not been generous to her. Born and raised in Queens, the daughter of a seamstress and a construction worker, she has always known what it means to work hard. She married young to John, a man she loved with the same intensity he loved fixing things. John worked with security systems, installing alarms, cameras, and safes in companies and luxury homes. He had an almost magical talent for understanding mechanisms, codes, locks. He would spend hours explaining to their son Lucas how everything worked. He used to say that security wasn't just about machines, but about understanding people's fears and how they tried to protect themselves from them. But life has a cruel way of stealing what we love most. 2 years ago, John got sick. The body that had always been strong began to fail. The doctors spoke of expensive treatments, of medications that their insurance wouldn't cover. Maria did everything she could. She sold the little they had. She took out loans. But it wasn't enough. John passed away one winter morning, leaving Maria with a 14-year-old son and a debt that seemed impossible to pay. She took any job she could find, cleaning offices, malls, apartment buildings. There was no shame in it for her. There was only survival. That afternoon, as Maria begins to empty the trash cans in the boardroom, Edward looks at her as one might look at a piece of furniture that's out of place. He stops talking and raises his hand, interrupting Julian in the middle of a sentence about investments. The silence that follows is heavy. "Ma'am, could you please come back later?" Maria looks up, startled. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll just finish up here real quick and—" He cuts her off with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. No, no. Actually, since you're here, perhaps we can take advantage of the moment. The executives exchange confused glances. Robert frowns. Anthony adjusts his glasses, uncomfortable. Edward stands up and walks toward Maria, who instinctively steps back. He points to the cleaning cart. How long have you worked here, Maria? She swallows hard. 3 months, sir. And before that? What did you do? I worked in other places. Cleaning, too. Edward nods, as if deeply interested. And do you have children? I have a son, sir, Lucas. He's 16. Ah, 16, an interesting age. Does he go to school? Yes, he does. He's a sophomore in high school. Edward walks back to his chair but doesn't sit. He remains standing, his hands resting on the back of the chair like an actor at center stage. And the boy's father? Is he around? Maria feels her heart race. The question is simple, but the way he asks it feels like a trap. No, sir. He's been gone for 2 years. Gone. Edward repeats the word slowly, savoring it. What a delicate expression. Did he leave you? Maria presses her lips together, fighting back the tears that threaten to surface. No, sir. He passed away. The silence that follows is so thick, it seems to suck the air out of the room. Anthony shuffles his folders uncomfortably. Patricia looks down. Julian clears his throat. But Edward just smiles, the smile of someone who has found exactly what he was looking for. I'm sorry for your loss, Maria. It must be difficult raising a son alone, especially in a city like New York where everything is so expensive. Maria just nods, unable to find words. Edward continues, his voice taking on an almost theatrical tone. You know, I was just thinking. We executives spend all day talking about strategies, numbers, growth. But sometimes we forget about the people who keep everything running. The people who clean our offices, who serve our coffee, who empty our trash. He pauses, looking around the table. Robert crosses his arms, attentive. The others remain silent. Edward turns his attention back to Maria. And I wonder, Maria, what would you say if I offered you an opportunity to change your life? To earn in a single day more money than you would in years of work? Maria frowns, confused. I don't understand, sir. Edward walks to the corner of the room, where a metal structure is covered by a black cloth. He pulls the cloth away with a dramatic gesture, revealing a state-of-the-art steel safe. It's an imposing machine with a digital keypad, biometric locks, and a locking system that looks like something out of a spy movie. This safe, Maria, was installed here 3 months ago. It's the most advanced on the market. Triple security system. A 16-digit alphanumeric password, fingerprint recognition, iris scan. It's considered impenetrable. Not even the best security experts could open it without authorization. He looks back at Maria, his eyes glinting with a veiled cruelty. I propose the following. If you or your son can open this safe in, let's say, 1 week, I will pay your family $1 million. 1 million, Maria. Enough money to pay off all your debts, give your son a decent life, maybe even buy a house. The air seems to have been drained from the room. Julian looks at Edward as if he's gone insane. Anthony removes his glasses and massages the bridge of his nose. Robert remains impassive, but there's something predatory in his gaze. Maria is completely paralyzed, unable to process what she has just heard. Edward approaches her again, his voice low and venomous. Of course, I know it's impossible, but I thought it would be an interesting way to illustrate the difference between us, don't you think? Between those who build empires and those who just clean the floors where those empires were built. Maria feels the tears finally stream down her face. She can't speak. She can't move. Julian Miller, the finance director, timidly raises his hand. Edward, maybe this is a little... Be honest, Julian. Edward cuts him off, his voice sharp. This isn't cruel. It's just reality. And reality isn't delicate. Robert Fisher then speaks up. His voice is deep and controlled. It's an interesting demonstration, Edward. It shows exactly why we invest so much in security, why systems like this exist, to protect what we've built from those who could never have access otherwise. Maria grips the handles of her cleaning cart so tightly, her knuckles turn white. She wants to scream. She wants to say that her John was 10 times the man any of them would ever be, that he fixed the things they broke, that he understood security better than any expensive technology could ever replace. But the words won't come out. She just lowers her head, takes her cart, and leaves the room, leaving behind the muffled sound of discreet laughter and low-voiced comments. Edward sits back down, pleased with himself. Well, now that we've dealt with that distraction, let's get back to business. But something has changed in the room. Anthony Carter looks at Edward with an expression bordering on disapproval. Patricia Evans nervously fiddles with her phone, clearly uncomfortable. Only Robert remains unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For him, the scene was just a confirmation of what he had always believed. Hierarchy exists for a reason. Everyone has their place, and to challenge that place is not only futile, but dangerous. Meanwhile, Maria takes the service stairs down, her heart shattered. She doesn't use the main elevator. Employees like her rarely do. There's an invisible but very real division between those who can walk the brightly lit hallways and those who must remain in the shadows. She reaches the locker room in the basement, a cramped, damp space where the uniforms smell of bleach and sweat. She sits on a wooden bench, her hands trembling, and finally allows the tears to come with full force. She thinks of John, of how he would hug her after a long day, of how he always said that a person's dignity isn't in what they do, but in how they do it, of how he taught Lucas to fix things, to understand systems, to never underestimate the power of knowledge. John never had a college degree. He never worked in glass offices, but he was wise in a way that men like Edward could never comprehend. Maria dries her tears and takes a deep breath. She has to be strong. Lucas is at home studying, waiting for her. He can't see her like this. He can't know about the humiliation she just endured. But at the same time, a part of her wants to tell him, wants him to know, because maybe, just maybe, there's something that can be done, something John taught his son that she doesn't fully understand. While Maria struggles to compose herself, upstairs in the boardroom, Julian Miller discreetly takes out his phone and records the last few minutes of the conversation. It's not a premeditated decision. He just feels that something important has just happened, something that needs to be documented. He doesn't know it yet, but this small act will unleash a storm that none of them are prepared to face. The afternoon wears on. The city of New York continues its chaotic dance of traffic, horns, and haste. In the halls of Thompson Sterling, the routine remains unchanged. Meetings happen, contracts are signed, money changes hands. But something invisible has begun to move, a hairline crack in a structure that was believed to be unshakable. Maria finishes her shift and takes the subway back home. The trip takes almost 2 hours, crossing through boroughs with increasingly modest neighborhoods and narrower streets. She looks out the window, watching the city lights turn on one by one, and thinks of all the invisible people who keep New York running. The bus drivers who work 12-hour days, the security guards who stay awake all night, the cooks who prepare meals for families who will never know their names, each of them with their stories, their pains, their hopes, all invisible to those who live in the glass towers. When she finally gets home, a small 2-bedroom apartment in a housing complex in Queens, Lucas is in the living room, surrounded by books and notebooks. He's a thin boy, with dark, intense eyes and slightly messy brown hair. He has his father's serious face, but his mother's sensitive eyes. When he sees Maria walk in, he immediately knows something is wrong. "Mom? What happened?" Maria tries to smile, but fails. "Nothing, honey. Just a long day." Lucas gets up and goes to her. He's grown so much in the last 2 years, he's almost as tall as Maria now. He hugs her, and she feels the comforting strength of his embrace. For a moment, she allows herself to be weak, allows the tears to return. And then, slowly, she tells him. She tells him about the meeting, about the cruel man, about the impossible safe, about the humiliation she felt. Lucas listens to it all in silence. His face remains calm, but something in his eyes changes. A determination that Maria recognizes. It's the same determination John had when facing a difficult problem. When his mother finishes speaking, Lucas is silent for a long moment. Then he says something that completely surprises her. "Mom, I can open that safe." Maria looks at him incredulous. "Lucas, no, that's not the point. It was just cruelty. He wasn't serious." Lucas shakes his head. "I know he wasn't serious, but I am. Dad taught me everything about security systems. For years, Mom. I know how those safes work. I know their flaws. I know how people think when they create passwords. Dad always said that security isn't about perfect machines. It's about understanding the humans who program them." Maria sits on the couch, her legs feeling weak. "Lucas, this is crazy. They'll never even let you get near that safe." Lucas kneels in front of her, taking her hands. "Mom, it's not about the money. It's about showing them they're not invincible. It's about proving that the knowledge Dad had, that he passed on to me, is worth more than any expensive degree. It's about dignity." Maria looks into her son's eyes and sees something that both scares her and fills her with pride. She sees John. She sees the same fire, the same unwavering conviction, and for the first time since she left that boardroom, she feels something other than humiliation. She feels hope. That night, Lucas doesn't sleep. He stays in his room surrounded by his father's old notes. Notebooks filled with diagrams, explanations, codes. John documented everything. He was meticulous. He used to say that knowledge only had value if it could be shared. Lucas rereads everything, absorbing every detail, every nuance. He thinks about the safe he's only seen through his mother's descriptions. He thinks about the triple security systems. He thinks about Edward Thompson and his cruel smile. And then he understands. It's not the safe that's vulnerable. It's the people who created it. It's the egos that need to prove their superiority. It's the predictable patterns that humans always follow when they try to hide something. John used to say that the biggest security flaw isn't in the machines, but in the arrogance of those who program them. People like Edward always underestimate others, and that underestimation is the greatest vulnerability of all. The next morning, Maria wakes up with her decision made. If Lucas believes he can do this, if he carries his father's legacy with him, then she won't stop him. She will support him because maybe, just maybe, this is the way to honor John, to show the world that he wasn't just another invisible worker, that he left something precious behind, something that all of Edward's money can't buy. Meanwhile, in the glass tower in Midtown, Edward Thompson wakes up in his penthouse apartment, has his breakfast prepared by a housekeeper, whose name he's never bothered to learn, and gets ready for another day of conquest and domination. He has already completely forgotten about Maria and his cruel challenge. To him, it was just a moment of amusement, a reminder of his own superiority. But the universe has a funny way of balancing things, and sometimes revenge doesn't come with fury or violence. It comes with silence, knowledge, and the patience of someone who knows how to wait for the right moment. Lucas Sanchez is about to teach a lesson that none of the executives at Thompson Sterling will ever forget. A lesson about the true meaning of power, about the difference between building walls and building bridges, about what happens when those who have been made invisible finally decide to be seen. The sun hadn't fully risen when Maria and Lucas left their apartment that Monday. The city was waking up slowly, with the first crowded subways and street vendors setting up their carts on the corners. The crisp New York morning air bit at their skin, but inside Maria there was a strange warmth, a mix of fear and determination she couldn't quite name. Lucas walked beside her in silence, a backpack on his shoulders, his eyes fixed ahead. He seemed older that morning, more serious, as if he had crossed an invisible line between childhood and something greater. Over the weekend, Lucas had locked himself in his room, studying every one of his father's notes, every diagram, every explanation of security systems. Maria watched him from a distance, bringing him food he barely touched, seeing the light in his room on until the early hours of the morning. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to protect him. But she knew this was no longer about protecting. It was about trusting in the legacy John had left behind, trusting in the intelligence of the son she had raised, trusting that sometimes justice has to be fought for, not waited for. On Sunday night, Lucas finally came out of his room. He sat next to his mother in their small living room and explained his plan. He wasn't going to break into the safe. He wasn't going to destroy anything. He was just going to expose the system's vulnerabilities, show that the impenetrable fortress had cracks that no one had noticed, cracks created not by technology, but by human arrogance. John always said that the best security systems failed not because they were poorly built, but because they underestimated the creativity of those who wanted to get in. And more importantly, because the people who programmed them always left back doors based on their own emotional weaknesses. Maria had listened with a heavy heart, but she didn't interrupt him. When he finished, she simply asked if he was sure. Lucas looked at her with those dark eyes, so much like his father's, and said he had never been more sure of anything in his life. That this wasn't about proving something to Edward Thompson, it was about proving to himself that his father's knowledge didn't die with him, that it still lived, transformed, in the mind and hands of his son. Now, as they boarded the subway that would take them to Midtown, Maria held Lucas's hand tightly. She had called the company on Friday, asking to speak to Edward's assistant. She explained in the firmest voice she could manage that her son accepted the challenge of the safe. On the other end of the line, there was a long pause, then a muffled laugh. The assistant said she would check, but made it clear that this was absurd. No one expected her to actually come back. It was just a cruel joke from a powerful man. But Maria insisted, and by the end of the day, she received a text confirming they could come in on Monday at 9 in the morning. When they arrived at the building, the same glass tower that seemed even more intimidating in the morning light, Maria felt her legs weaken. Lucas squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay, Mom. Trust me." They entered through the main lobby, not the service entrance. This time Maria wasn't there as an employee. She was there as a mother, as a witness, as someone who refused to remain invisible. The security guard at the front desk frowned when he saw them. He recognized Maria but found it strange to see her there at that time accompanied by a teenager. She explained they had an appointment. The guard checked the system, clearly surprised, and made a quick call. Then he pointed them to the elevator. On the 42nd floor, the same boardroom awaited them. But this time there were more people. Edward was there, of course, sitting at the head of the table with that condescending smile Maria already knew. Robert Fisher was by his side, arms crossed, his expression suspicious. Julian Miller and Patricia Evans were also present, as was Anthony Carter, the lawyer. And there were 3 other people Maria didn't recognize. 2 men and a woman, all wearing badges from a security firm. They had been called to witness, to ensure nothing improper happened. Edward stood up as Maria and Lucas entered. "Ah, what a pleasant surprise. You actually came. I thought you would have given up." Lucas stepped forward, his voice firm and clear. "We didn't give up, sir. We're here to accept the challenge." Edward looked at the boy as if he were watching a dog try to speak. He laughed, a low, mocking laugh. "You're the son, aren't you? Lucas, if I'm not mistaken. How old are you? Kid?" 16, sir." 16, Edward repeated, looking around the room as if sharing an inside joke. "And you think you can open a safe that even experts couldn't crack?" Lucas didn't look away. "I don't know if I can, sir, but I'd like to try." Robert Fisher spoke up, his voice harsh. "This is a waste of time, Edward. We shouldn't have even let them come." Edward raised a hand, silencing him. "No, no, Robert. I made a promise. And a man in my position always keeps his promises." He looked back at Lucas. "Very well, kid, you have 1 week to try. The safe is right there, as you can see. The experts here will ensure you don't use any illegal or destructive methods. You can study it, analyze it, do whatever you want. But if you try to damage it or use any unauthorized device, the challenge ends immediately." Lucas nodded. "Understood. And just to be clear," Edward continued, walking over to the safe and placing a hand on it, "this safe contains extremely important documents, contracts, agreements, confidential information. If you somehow manage to access them without authorization, it will be considered a crime. So I hope you understand the seriousness of what you're doing." Lucas remained impassive. "I understand perfectly, sir." Edward smiled, satisfied. "Excellent. Then you may begin." Lucas approached the safe slowly, like an artist approaching a blank canvas. He observed the metal structure, the digital keypad, the biometric locks. He lightly touched the surface, feeling the texture of the steel. The security experts watched him with curiosity, some taking notes on clipboards. Maria stood near the door, her hands clasped, silently praying to every saint she knew. Lucas took a small notebook from his backpack and began to sketch. He didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for help. He just observed and took notes. He measured dimensions. He photographed angles. He examined every screw, every weld. The minutes dragged on. Edward, who had initially watched with interest, began to lose patience. He looked at his watch. He looked at Robert. He sighed loudly. "How long are you going to just stand there looking at it, kid?" Lucas didn't answer. He was too focused. After almost an hour, he finally stepped away from the safe and walked to one of the windows overlooking the city below. He stood there looking at the streets, the tiny cars, the invisible people. Then he turned and said something that took everyone by surprise. "My father installed a safe exactly like this one 3 years ago at a bank headquarters downtown. I was with him. I was 13. He explained every step of the process to me, every security protocol, every potential vulnerability." The room fell silent. Edward narrowed his eyes. "And what's the relevance of that?" Lucas shrugged. "I'm just saying I know this model. I know how it was built and I know its flaws." Robert Fisher stood up abruptly. "That's impossible. This safe is state-of-the-art. It has no flaws." Lucas looked at him with unnerving calm. "Every system has flaws, sir, especially those sold as perfect, because perfection creates confidence, and confidence creates negligence." One of the security experts, a middle-aged man with graying hair, coughed discreetly. "The kid's right, technically. No system is completely impenetrable." Edward made an impatient gesture. "Fine. So what do you propose, kid? Are you going to stand here for a week taking notes?" Lucas shook his head. "No, I already know what I need to do. Can I come back tomorrow to demonstrate?" The room erupted in murmurs. "Patricia." Evans whispered something to Julian. Robert snorted in disbelief. Edward watched Lucas with an expression that wavered between irritation and curiosity. "Tomorrow? You've barely been here an hour." Lucas put the notebook back in his backpack. "Yes, sir. An hour was enough. Can I come back tomorrow at 9 in the morning?" Edward looked around, seeking confirmation in the faces of the others. Anthony Carter cleared his throat. "Technically, he has a week. I see no problem in letting him try tomorrow." Edward sighed as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Fine. Tomorrow at 9. But let's be clear, kid. If this is some kind of trick, some attempt to waste my time, you and your mother will regret it." Lucas just nodded. "Understood, sir. Let's go, Mum." Maria, who had been quiet the whole time, finally moved. She and Lucas left the room under the incredulous stares of everyone present. In the elevator, she grabbed her son's arm. "Lucas, what are you doing? Do you really know how to open that safe?" Lucas looked at her, and for the first time since they entered the building, he smiled. A small but confident smile. "I know exactly how, Mom. Dad taught me. It's not about force, it's not about technology. It's about understanding how people think, and men like Edward Thompson think in very predictable ways." That afternoon, while Maria went back to work, Lucas went to the nearest public library. He needed to confirm a few things. He needed to access information about Edward's company, about the people who worked there, about the security standards that companies of that size typically used. John always said that information was power, and Lucas was gathering all the power he could. Meanwhile, in the boardroom of Thompson Sterling, Edward called a private meeting with Robert Fisher. The two were alone, the door closed. Edward was visibly irritated. "That kid is bluffing, Robert. Obviously he's bluffing." Robert nodded, but there was a hint of concern on his face. "Probably. But what if he's not? What if he really knows something about the safe?" Edward slammed his hand on the table. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance to prove it. You're the director of security. Find a way to discredit this family. Find something in her past. Debts, lawsuits, anything. And if you can't find anything, create it." Robert hesitated for a moment. Edward, that could be risky. If anyone finds out we're fabricating evidence. Edward cut him off with an icy glare. No one will find out. And even if they do, who's going to believe the word of a cleaning lady against mine? Do what I told you, Robert, or I'll find someone who will. Robert swallowed hard and nodded. I'll take care of it. The next morning, the boardroom was even more crowded. The news had spread throughout the company. Curious employees found excuses to walk by the floor, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Edward had decided to turn it into a spectacle. If the boy was going to fail, and he certainly was, then let him fail in front of as many witnesses as possible. Lucas arrived promptly at 9, accompanied by Maria. He carried only his backpack. No sophisticated equipment, no special tools. When he entered the room and saw the number of people, he showed no nervousness. He just greeted everyone with a nod and walked straight to the safe. Edward was sitting in his chair, like a king on his throne. Good morning, Lucas. I hope you slept well. It'll be your only consolation after you fail miserably. Lucas didn't respond to the insult. He knelt in front of the safe and began to work. First, he examined the digital keypad. He touched the buttons, feeling their texture, their resistance. Then, he closed his eyes and stayed that way for a long minute, as if meditating. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression, an absolute certainty. He looked at Edward. Sir, this safe has a 16-digit password system, correct? Edward nodded, intrigued. Correct. And was it programmed by someone on your team or by the manufacturer? Edward frowned. I programmed it myself. Why? Lucas nodded, as if that confirmed something. Because people, when they create passwords, especially long ones, tend to use patterns, important dates, numerical sequences that make personal sense. They believe long passwords are secure, but security doesn't come from length, it comes from randomness, and humans are terrible at being random. Robert Fisher laughed sarcastically. So you're saying you're going to guess the password? Kid, do you have any idea how many possible combinations there are in a 16-digit password? Lucas looked at him. I do, sir. 10 to the 16th power. 10 quadrillion possibilities. But I'm not going to guess, I'm going to deduce. Edward leaned forward, now genuinely interested. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Lucas took a deep breath. He knew this was the moment, that everything his father had taught him, everything he had learned, was about to be tested. Mr. Thompson, may I ask you a few personal questions? Edward hesitated, then nodded. You may. When were you born? Edward frowned, suspicious. Why does that matter? Just answer, please. June 23rd, 1972. Lucas wrote it down in his notebook. And do you have children? Edward crossed his arms. I have a daughter, Isabella. When was she born? October 15th, 2005. Lucas continued to write. And this company, Thompson Sterling, was founded in what year? Edward was starting to get impatient. In 1998. But what does any of this have to do with... Lucas interrupted him gently. Just one more question. What's the number of the apartment where you live? Edward snorted. The penthouse. It doesn't have a number, it's 42. Lucas closed his notebook and turned back to the safe. Thank you, sir. Now I can try. The room fell into absolute silence. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed louder. Lucas placed his fingers on the keypad and began to type. Each number he pressed echoed in the room like a drumbeat. The people around held their breath. Maria felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Lucas typed 16 digits. Then he pressed the enter key. For a moment, nothing happened. Edward started to smile, ready to mock him, but then a sound, a soft click. The panel lit up green, and the safe door began to swing open slowly, revealing its interior filled with documents and envelopes. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one breathed. Edward turned pale, his eyes fixed on the open safe. Robert Fisher shot up from his chair, incredulous. The security experts looked at each other, shocked. Julian Miller dropped the pen he was holding. Patricia Evans brought a hand to her mouth. Lucas stood up and took a step back, without touching anything inside the safe. He looked at Edward. "The password, sir, was a combination of your and your daughter's birth dates, interspersed with the year the company was founded, and your apartment number, 23067215100598842. 16 digits. Personal information that anyone close to you could find out. My father always said that people protect their fortunes with the very information they love the most. And in doing so, they leave the door open for those who understand how love can become a vulnerability." Edward still couldn't speak. He stared at the open safe as if he were seeing a ghost. Lucas continued, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't touch anything. I didn't take any documents. I just proved that the system you believed to be impenetrable had a human flaw. The flaw of believing that complexity is the same as security." Maria felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of pride. She saw, in that moment, not just her son. She saw John. She saw the man she loved, the knowledge he left behind, the wisdom he had planted. And she saw that it would never die. It would live forever, passed from one generation to the next. Robert Fisher finally found his voice, though it came out shaky. This proves nothing. He could have found out the password through other means. He could have hacked our systems. This is fraud. One of the security experts spoke up. "Actually, Mr. Fisher, we've been monitoring the boy since he arrived yesterday. He hasn't had access to any computer, any device. He just observed the safe. What he did was social engineering, legal and perfectly valid." Edward finally stood up. His legs seemed unsteady. He looked at Lucas with an expression that mixed anger, fear, and something that might have been respect. You really did it?" Lucas just nodded. "I did, sir. But like I said, it's not about the money. It was about showing that knowledge and respect are worth more than any safe." Edward looked around the room, seeing the shocked faces, the expressions of disbelief. He realized in that moment that something fundamental had shifted. The structure he believed to be solid had been shaken, not with force, not with violence, but with intelligence, patience, and a lesson he never imagined he would receive from a 16-year-old boy. The news spread like wildfire. First through the halls of Thompson Sterling, whispered among incredulous employees, then through corporate messaging groups loaded with shock emojis and exclamation points. Within hours, it had breached the building's walls and reached other companies, other glass towers, other offices where powerful people looked at each other and wondered if their own security was as fragile as they believed it to be, impenetrable. But it was Julian Miller who, without fully realizing the consequences of his act, turned that moment into a global explosion. On that Tuesday night, after hours of reflecting on what he had witnessed, he took out his phone and posted the video he had recorded 2 days earlier on social media. The video of the humiliation, the scene where Edward Thompson mocked Maria, exposing her, Payne and her sons as if they were entertainment for an audience of executives. Julian didn't write a caption. He didn't need to. The images spoke for themselves. The video was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. It showed Edward in all his arrogance, smiling as he offered the impossible challenge. It showed Maria with tears on her face, holding her cleaning cart. It showed the other executives laughing discreetly, some looking away, but none intervening. And it showed Robert Fisher agreeing, reinforcing the humiliation with his words about hierarchy and everyone's place. In 12 hours, the video had 2 million views. In 24, 15 million. People shared it with anger, with outrage, with tears. The comments multiplied by the thousands. Workers from all over the country saw themselves in Maria. They told their own stories of humiliation, of cruel bosses, of moments when they were treated as invisible. The hashtag #TheInvisibleRevolution started trending, created spontaneously by a user who had worked for years as a housekeeper and knew exactly what it was like to be looked at without being seen. Edward woke up on Wednesday to his phone exploding with notifications. His assistant called at 6 in the morning, her voice tense. "Sir, we have a situation. You need to look at the internet." He turned on the television and saw his own face on the major news networks. Pundits discussed the video. Human resources experts analyzed his behavior. Psychologists talked about abuse of power. Labor lawyers explained that his conduct could constitute workplace harassment, but it was when he opened his stock market app that the real terror hit him. Thomson Sterling's stock was in a freefall. Investors were pulling out. Clients were canceling contracts. Business partners issued statements distancing themselves from the company. In less than 24 hours, he had lost nearly $300 million in market value. Edward tried to do damage control. He called an emergency meeting. He brought in public relations specialists. He prepared an official statement apologizing and claiming the video was taken out of context. But the internet doesn't forgive, and the internet doesn't forget. The more he tried to explain, the more people attacked him. Consumer groups organized boycotts. Digital influencers called for no one to do business with the company. Protesters began to gather in front of the building on Park Avenue, carrying signs with phrases like, "Dignity has no price and workers are people." Meanwhile, Maria and Lucas suddenly found themselves at the center of a hurricane. Reporters camped outside their apartment building. Cameras followed them when they left home. Their faces were in every newspaper, on every screen. Some treated them as heroes. Others accused them of opportunism, of having staged everything to gain fame and money. Conspiracy theories sprouted in obscure internet forums. Some claimed Lucas hadn't really opened the safe, that it was all a hoax. Others said Maria was being manipulated by political groups. The pressure was overwhelming. Maria stopped sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw camera flashes, heard shouted questions, felt the weight of millions of eyes on her life. Lucas tried to be strong for her, but even he was starting to feel the strain. His classmates looked at him differently, some with admiration, others with envy, still others with contempt, the children of business owners who saw him as a threat to the natural order of things. On Thursday, Robert Fisher put the plan Edward had ordered into action. He hired private investigators to dig into Maria's life. He looked for debts, lawsuits, anything that could be used to discredit her. And when he found nothing substantial, he started planting false information. He created anonymous social media profiles accusing Maria of stealing from her previous job. He spread rumors that she was suing the company for an absurd amount of money. He tried to make it seem like the whole thing was just an extortion attempt, but Robert underestimated something fundamental. He underestimated the other employees at Thomson Sterling, those who, like Maria, lived in the company's shadows. The security guards, the receptionists, the assistants, the cleaning staff, the maintenance crew, people who had always been invisible, but who saw everything, heard everything, and remembered everything. One of Maria's colleagues, Ms. Celia, a 52-year-old woman who had worked at the company for 15 years, was the first to speak out. She contacted an investigative journalist and told her story, how she had been repeatedly humiliated, how her pay was often delayed without explanation, how she had seen other female employees fired for complaining about harassment. She had proof, emails, text messages, audio recordings she had secretly made, anticipating a day when she would need to defend herself. After Miss Celia, others came forward. A security guard told of the times he was forced to block employees who were trying to report irregularities. A receptionist spoke of how she was instructed to lie to dissatisfied clients. An administrative assistant revealed he had witnessed meetings where contracts were forged. Each testimony was a stone thrown at the seemingly solid structure, and the structure began to crumble. Lucas, meanwhile, discovered something that would completely change the course of the story. During his time examining the safe, he had noticed something no one else had. The safe wasn't just physical, it was connected to an internal network, a digital system that stored backups of all the physical documents. And that system had an even more glaring security flaw than the predictable password. A backdoor left by the programmers, likely for maintenance, that had never been closed. Lucas didn't hack the system. He knew that would be illegal. But he identified the flaw and reported it to the security experts who had witnessed his demonstration at the safe. Those men, serious professionals who took their work seriously, were horrified. They informed Edward that the company's entire network was vulnerable, that if a 16-year-old had identified the flaw, professional hackers could have as well. And more, that it was possible someone had already accessed that data without anyone knowing. Edward ordered an immediate audit, and that's when the real nightmare began. The audit revealed that the system had, in fact, been accessed multiple times by multiple people, and what was found in those accesses was devastating. Documents showing tax fraud, emails revealing evasion schemes, illegal contracts with shell companies, systematic persecution of employees who questioned irregular practices. But the most shocking discovery was that Robert Fisher, the director of security, was the main person responsible for covering it all up. He had created a parallel espionage network within the company itself. He monitored employee conversations. He tapped phones. He hacked personal emails, all to ensure that nothing that could harm Edward ever came to light. And when something threatened to surface, he destroyed evidence, intimidated witnesses, and fabricated false evidence. The audit also revealed that other executives were involved. Patricia Evans, the marketing director, had used company funds for illegal political campaigns. Julian Miller, who ironically had been the one to post the video, had embezzled money from social projects into personal accounts. Only Anthony Carter, the lawyer, seemed to have kept his hands clean, though he admitted he had always known about irregularities but never had the courage to report them. When the first reports from the audit leaked to the press on Friday, the storm turned into a hurricane. District attorneys opened investigations. The IRS started examining the company's tax records. The police launched inquiries into the accusations of persecution and fabrication of evidence. Shareholders filed lawsuits seeking damages. Employees threatened to go on strike if drastic measures weren't taken. Edward Thompson found himself alone for the first time in his life. His powerful friends vanished. His political allies distanced themselves. His family, who had always enjoyed the luxury his fortune provided, started asking uncomfortable questions. His daughter, Isabella, showed up at his apartment in tears, saying she was being harassed at her university, that her classmates were calling her the tyrant's daughter, that she could no longer leave home without being recognized and insulted. And it was in that moment, alone in his penthouse apartment, looking out the window at the city that seemed to have turned against him, that Edward felt something he had never felt before. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was something worse. It was the realization that maybe, just maybe, he had spent his entire life building a castle on sand, that all his wealth, all his power, all his influence were just illusions maintained by the forced submission of those he trampled on. He remembered his own childhood, the son of a small shop owner. He had grown up with his father repeating that the world was divided into the strong and the weak, the winners and the losers. He had learned to be strong. He had learned to win. But now, looking at his own reflection in the window, he wondered if he had only learned to be cruel. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Queens, Maria and Lucas were also facing their own internal storms. Maria received messages of support, but also threats. People saying she had destroyed a company, that she had cost thousands of jobs. Others offered money for exclusive interviews to appear on television shows to tell her story. Lawyers showed up offering to sue Edward, promising multi-million-dollar settlements. Lucas saw it all with a clarity that was frightening for his age. He understood that this had all spiraled out of his control, that the simple act of opening a safe to prove a point had unleashed something much bigger. He didn't regret it, but he felt the weight of responsibility. He saw how it was affecting his mother. He saw how their lives would never be the same. One night, as Maria cried in the kitchen exhausted from the pressure, Lucas sat beside her. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never imagined it would get like this." Maria wiped her tears and held her son's face in her hands. "Don't be sorry, my son. You did the right thing. It's the world that's wrong. It's this whole system. That's rotten. You just turned on a light, and when you turn on a light in a dark place, the cockroaches always scatter." Lucas hugged his mother, and the two of them stayed like that for a long time, finding strength in each other. They didn't know it, but that same night, in his lonely apartment, Edward was also holding his daughter, also seeking strength, also wondering how he had gotten to this point. On Saturday morning, Lucas received an unexpected message. It was from one of the security experts who had witnessed the safe opening. The man said there was something Lucas needed to see, something that was on the digital system he had identified as vulnerable. He arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Lucas went alone, against his mother's wishes. When he arrived, the expert, who introduced himself as Sergio, was visibly nervous. He handed Lucas a flash drive. "Look, kid, what I'm about to show you is illegal. I accessed that system using the vulnerability you identified. I shouldn't have, but I felt it was necessary. There were things in there that needed to come to light." Lucas took the flash drive, hesitant. "What's on it?" Sergio leaned forward, his voice low. "Documents, emails, recordings, proof of everything Robert Fisher and the others did. But there's something else. There are records showing that Edward knew everything, that he wasn't just a victim of his subordinates' greed. He was the architect of it all. He ordered the persecutions. He authorized the fraud. He built this system of terror." Lucas felt his stomach churn. "And why are you giving this to me?" "Because you were brave enough to challenge this system. Because you proved that knowledge can be more powerful than money. And because I think you'll know what to do with it." Sergio stood up. "But there's a price, kid. If you use this, you become a target. Powerful people will want to silence you. Your life and your mother's life could be in danger. So think carefully before you do anything." Lucas put the flash drive in his pocket and nodded. "I'll think about it, thank you." When he got home, Lucas plugged the flash drive into his old computer. He spent hours reading documents, listening to recordings, looking at emails. And the more he read, the more his outrage grew. This wasn't just about him and his mother. It was about hundreds, maybe thousands of people who had been harmed, employees unjustly fired, families destroyed, lives ruined, all to protect one man's fortune and ego. But Lucas also understood something crucial. He understood that simply leaking this information wouldn't solve anything. It would cause more chaos, more suffering. What was needed wasn't destruction. It was transformation. It was real justice, not revenge. He spent Sunday thinking, talking with his mother, reflecting on what his father would say if he were there. And then on Monday morning, he made a decision. He wasn't going to leak the documents. He was going to use them as a negotiating tool. He was going to force Edward to do the right thing, not for revenge, not for money, but because it was the only way to truly change things. Lucas took out his phone and typed a short, direct email to Edward Thompson. "Sir, I have information that could completely destroy your company and your life, but I don't want destruction. I want justice. I want transformation. Can we talk?" He sent the email and waited. It didn't take long. 15 minutes later, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered. On the other end, Edward's voice, tired and broken. "Where do you want to meet?" Lucas thought for a moment. "At the cemetery where my father is buried. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning." Edward hesitated, then agreed. "I'll be there." Lucas hung up the phone and looked out his bedroom window. The storm was at its peak, but he felt that soon, very soon, the calm would come. And in that calm, perhaps, something new would be born, something better, something his father would be proud to see. Calvary Cemetery in Queens awoke under a light fog that Tuesday morning. It was one of New York's largest cemeteries, a place where millions of stories rested beneath the earth, each headstone a silent testament to lives lived, loves lost, dreams fulfilled and shattered. Lucas arrived early, accompanied by Maria. They walked among the paths, past ornate tombs and simple crosses, until they reached the spot they had visited every Sunday since John had passed. The headstone was simple, grey granite with black lettering. John Sanchez, beloved father and husband, his true fortune was the knowledge he shared. Next to the headstone, planted by Lucas shortly, after the burial grew a small tree, a golden rain tree, still young but already strong. At the base of the tree, protected by an acrylic case, was the first tool John had ever given his son, an old rusted wrench but full of history. Lucas knelt before the headstone and placed his hand on the earth. "Dad," he whispered, I'm going to need your strength today. I'm going to need your wisdom. Help me do the right thing." Maria stood beside her son, a hand on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a few minutes in silence until they heard footsteps approaching. Edward Thompson was walking slowly down the path. He looked different. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore jeans and a simple sweater. No luxury watch, no designer glasses. His hair was unkempt. There were deep, dark circles under his eyes. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in a week. He stopped a few feet away, hesitant. Lucas stood up and motioned for him to come closer. Edward walked toward them, looking at the headstone. "This was your father?" Lucas nodded. "John Sanchez, the man who taught me everything I know, the man you never met, but who was 10 times wiser than anyone in that boardroom of yours." Edward swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Lucas continued, his voice firm but not aggressive. "My father always said that security wasn't about building impenetrable walls. It was about understanding why people feel the need to protect themselves, and the more someone protects themselves, the more they reveal their fears." Edward finally looked at Lucas. "Do you have the information you mentioned in the email?" Lucas took the flash drive from his pocket. "I do, it's all here. Documents, emails, recordings, enough proof to destroy you, your company, and every executive involved in the schemes." "And what do you want in return?" Edward asked, his voice weary. "Money. The million I promised. More." Lucas shook his head. "I don't want money, sir. I want justice. I want the employees who were harmed to be compensated. I want the people who were persecuted to receive recognition and public apologies. I want your company to be transformed into a place where human beings are treated like human beings, not disposable parts." Edward looked at the ground, his hands in his pockets. "And if I refuse?" "Then I go to the press, I go to the district attorneys. I will make sure all of this comes to light, and you will lose not only your fortune, but your freedom." Edward took a deep breath, then looked at Maria. "And you? What do you want?" Maria took a moment to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I want you to understand what you did, not just to me, but to all of us. All the people you treated as invisible. I want you to look us in the eye and see that we are just as human as you are, that our dreams matter, that our pain matters. I want you to learn what my husband knew without ever attending an expensive university. That dignity can't be bought, and that respect isn't demanded. It's earned." Edward closed his eyes. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind blew softly, making the leaves of the golden rain tree dance. Birds sang in the surrounding trees. The cemetery, paradoxically, was full of life. When Edward opened his eyes again, tears were streaming down his face. They were the first tears he had shed, in decades. Perhaps the first sincere tears of his entire adult life. "I've spent 53 years building an empire," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought the important thing was to be strong, to be ruthless, to be someone people feared. But I was wrong. I was completely wrong." He looked at Lucas. "Your father was richer than I will ever be, because he had something money can't buy. He had love. He had purpose. He had a real legacy." Edward wiped the tears with the back of his hand. "I don't know if I can fix everything I've broken. I don't know if I can redeem myself, but I'm going to try. I'll do what you're asking. I'll transform the company. I'll compensate those who need to be compensated. I'll expose the guilty parties, including myself. I'll do whatever it takes." Lucas held out his hand. "Then we have a deal. But it has to be public. It has to be real. No lawyers trying to soften the blow. No PR firms turning this into a marketing campaign. It has to be the raw, unvarnished truth." Edward shook the boy's hand. "It will be. I promise." That same afternoon, Edward called a press conference. It wasn't at the company headquarters. It wasn't in a luxury hotel. It was at a public school in Queens, in the same neighborhood where Maria and Lucas lived. The classroom was packed with journalists, cameras, microphones. But it was also filled with employees from Thompson Sterling, the invisible employees, those who were rarely heard. Ms. Celia was in the front row. Beside her, other workers who had found the courage to speak out. Edward walked onto the small makeshift stage with no aides by his side, no prepared script. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is Edward Thompson. For the last 30 years I have built a company worth billions. I earned respect in the market. I won awards. I was called a visionary. But all of it was built on the suffering of other people." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was in absolute silence. "I humiliated. I persecuted. I silenced voices that deserved to be heard. I treated human beings as if they were disposable tools. And when someone had the courage to confront me, when a mother and her son showed me that my fortress was made of sand, my first reaction was to try to destroy them." Edward looked directly into the cameras. "There is no excuse for what I did. There is no justification. But there is responsibility. And today, here, I accept all of it. I am resigning from my position as CEO of Thompson Sterling. I will be placing 20% of my personal shares into the creation of an educational fund that will be managed by representatives elected by the company's employees. This fund will be named after John Sanchez, a man I never met, but who left a greater legacy than I ever will." The room erupted in murmurs. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled furiously. Edward continued, his voice stronger now. "Furthermore, I will ensure that all employees who were persecuted, unjustly fired or harmed in any way are financially compensated and receive a formal apology. I will open all of the company's books to a public audit. I will cooperate fully with all ongoing legal investigations, and I will work for the rest of my life to ensure that no one is ever treated the way Maria Sanchez was treated." Edward made a gesture, and Maria walked onto the stage. She was trembling, but she held her head high. Edward turned to her. "Ms. Sanchez, in front of everyone here, I ask for your forgiveness, for what I did, for what I said, for the pain I caused you and your son. I was cruel, I was inhuman, and I am deeply ashamed." Maria looked at him, then at the audience filled with attentive faces. "I agreed to come here today not because I want revenge. I came because I want other people like me to not have to go through what I went through." She took a deep breath, feeling John beside her, feeling the strength he always gave her. "I have worked my whole life with dignity. I've cleaned floors, emptied trash cans, done jobs that many consider demeaning, but there is no shame in honest work. The shame lies with those who use their power to diminish others." She looked directly into the cameras. "I am Maria Sanchez. I am 38 years old. I am the widow of John Sanchez, the most honorable man I ever knew. I am the mother of Lucas Sanchez, a boy who had the courage that many adults lack. And today here, I represent all the invisible workers of this country, those who wake up before the sun rises, those who come home when the moon is already high, those who keep our cities running while others reap the rewards. We exist, we matter, and we will no longer be silenced." The applause that followed was deafening. Employees stood up. Journalists dropped their notebooks to clap. Even some of the executives present, those not involved in the schemes, joined the ovation. Maria felt tears stream down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, of victory, of justice finally served. Lucas then walked onto the stage. He looked at the crowd of cameras and microphones, but he didn't speak with the voice of a child. He spoke with the wisdom John had planted in him. "My father always said that true knowledge isn't about accumulating information, but about knowing how to use it to build, not to destroy. When I opened that safe, I didn't do it for revenge. I did it to prove a point, to show that systems believed to be perfect always have human flaws, and that sometimes the biggest flaw is arrogance." He paused. "What has happened here these past few weeks wasn't about me or my mother. It was about an entire system that needs to change. Companies that value profit over people, societies that measure success in money, not in dignity, structures that allow a few to decide the worth of many. This has to end." Lucas looked at Edward. "Mr. Thompson had the courage to admit his mistakes. That doesn't erase what was done, but it's a start. Now it's up to all of us, not just him, to ensure that this change is real, that it's lasting, that it transforms not just one company but the way we treat one another." The press conference lasted 3 hours. Journalists asked tough questions. Edward answered every one without flinching. Maria shared her full story, every detail of the humiliation, every moment of pain. Lucas explained, technically but in an accessible way, how he had opened the safe and identified the system's vulnerabilities. And when it was over, when the last camera was turned off, when the last journalist had left, the three of them stood in the empty room, exhausted but relieved. Edward looked at Maria and Lucas. "I know words aren't enough, but thank you for forcing me to look in the mirror, for giving me a chance to be better." Maria nodded. "Now it's up to you. Prove that this change is real." In the days that followed, the impact was monumental. The stock of Thomson Sterling began to climb again as investors saw that real changes were happening. But it wasn't the same kind of company. Robert Fisher was fired and criminally indicted for his actions. Julian Miller and Patricia Evans were also removed from their positions and faced lawsuits. Anthony Carter temporarily took over leadership of the company, working with employees to create a new governance structure. The John Sanchez Educational Fund was established with $500 million. Its board was composed of 10 people, all former rank-and-file employees of the company. Ms. Celia was elected board president. The fund would offer scholarships, professional training, support for small entrepreneurs, and development programs for underserved communities. Maria was invited to take a leadership position in the company, not out of charity but out of competence. She initially refused, feeling she wasn't qualified, but Lucas convinced her. "Mum, you've spent years seeing how this company works. You know every hallway, every department. You know what needs to change better than any expensive consultant." Maria accepted on one condition, that she could get a college degree in human resources management, something she had always dreamed of but never had the opportunity to pursue. The company not only agreed, but paid for her education. 3 years later, Maria would graduate with honors, proving that talent has nothing to do with prior opportunities. Lucas went back to school, but his life had changed completely. He was approached by universities offering full scholarships. Security firms wanted to hire him, but he turned everything down for the time being. He was only 16. He wanted to finish high school. He wanted to live a little of the adolescence he had lost. But on weekends, he gave talks at public schools, teaching young people about programming, digital security, and most importantly, about how knowledge is power. Edward kept every promise. He sold his penthouse apartment and moved to a simpler place. He donated a portion of his fortune to social causes. He began working as a pro bono consultant for small businesses, helping them grow without losing their humanity. His daughter, Isabella, initially ashamed, eventually became one of the biggest advocates for the changes. She started working at the John Sanchez Fund, using her privileged education to help others get the same opportunities. The cemetery where John was buried became a place of quiet pilgrimage, not in a religious sense but a symbolic one. People went there, especially workers who felt invisible, to leave flowers, to give thanks, to remember that change is possible. The golden rain tree grew strong and beautiful, blooming each spring with golden flowers that fell like tears of joy upon the earth. A year after that, Day in the Cemetery, the day of the Invisible Revolution, was established. Always on the date, Lucas opened the safe. It wasn't a national holiday, but many companies began to recognize it as a day of reflection, a day to remember that every person, regardless of their title or salary, deserves dignity and respect. Schools included the story of John, Maria, and Lucas in their curricula, not as a myth, but as a real example of how courage and knowledge can change structures that seem unshakable. 2 years later, Maria met someone, a math teacher named Richard, a widower like her father to a 12-year-old girl. They met at a talk Lucas was giving at a school. Richard was one of the only people who asked truly intelligent questions about social engineering. Maria approached him afterward to thank him for his genuine interest. They started talking, they had coffee, they had dinner, and slowly, with the care of those who have known great love and great loss, they allowed something new to blossom. Lucas approved. "Dad would approve too," he told his mother, holding her hands. "Dad wanted you to be happy, and you deserve to be." Maria remarried 3 years later. The ceremony was simple in the same cemetery next to John's headstone. It wasn't morbid. It was a way of honoring the past while embracing the future. Richard understood. He too had loved deeply and lost. He too knew that the human heart has an infinite capacity to love again without erasing previous loves. Lucas started college at 18, majoring in computer science with a focus on cybersecurity. But he never forgot his roots. He continued to live with his mother by choice, not necessity. He continued to visit his father's grave every Sunday. He continued to give talks, to teach, to share the knowledge he had received. Edward grew old, but in a different way than he would have before. His hair turned completely white. Deep wrinkles lined his face. But there was a peace in his eyes, a peace that money had never bought. He never led a major company again. He never became a billionaire again. But for the first time, when he looked in the mirror, he liked the man he saw. 5 years after the day it all began, Maria was giving a keynote speech at an international conference on dignity in the workplace. She was now a respected voice consulted by companies all over the world. At the end of her speech, a young woman approached her. She was crying. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for making me feel like I matter. I work at a huge corporation, and every day I feel invisible. But your story gave me hope." Maria hugged the young woman. "You are not invisible. No one is. And when you feel that way, remember, the brightest light comes from the darkest places. Keep shining." 10 years later, the golden rain tree in the cemetery had grown, so large that its roots had intertwined deeply with the earth, symbolically embracing John's final resting place. Lucas, now a 26-year-old man, a renowned cybersecurity expert, university professor, and workers' rights activist, brought his own daughter, 3-year-old Clara, to meet the grandfather she had never known in person. He knelt beside the headstone, little Clara in his arms. "Grandpa," he said softly, "this is my daughter. Her name means light. And she's going to grow up knowing that real wealth isn't in safes. It's in shared knowledge, in given love, in preserved dignity. She's going to grow up knowing that you didn't need degrees or fortunes to be great. You were great because you taught, because you loved, because you built something that no amount of time can destroy. A legacy of humanity." Clara touched the tree with her small hands and smiled. The yellow flowers of the golden rain tree fell gently, as if the tree itself were responding, saying that yes, everything was okay, that the cycle continued, that the light planted decades ago still shone, brighter than ever. Because in the end, what doesn't fit in safes is exactly what remains, not in the glass towers, not in the numbers of a bank account, but in the roots of what grows, in the stories that are told, in the lessons that are learned, in the lives that are transformed, in the voices that are finally heard, and in the certainty that, no matter how powerful the oppressor, there will always be someone with enough courage to say that no, this isn't right, that we can be better. And when that voice rises, when that knowledge is shared, when that silent revolution happens, the world changes, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. Because the truth, like the root of a tree, always finds its way through the concrete. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Maria, Lucas, and Edward has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of resilience, courage, and transformation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Was it the initial humiliation, the moment Lucas opened the safe, Edward's redemption, or perhaps Maria's strength in refusing to remain invisible? Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul and reminding us that all of us, no matter where we come from or what we do, deserve dignity and respect. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life. Until then,